already joining us, so let's get started. Welcome. I'm Bethany Beavis, Director of Events here at CreTech. I know there's a lot of distractions out there today, so thank you so much for joining us. I've been told there'll be no major developments in the next 60 minutes, so you guys can really lock in, and we're really glad to have you. So today's webinar is the new digital office experience. And pre-pandemic, a lot of these tech solutions and innovations we're going to be talking about today were really just nice to have. But post-pandemic, they're absolutely essential. So we asked our friends over at HqO to help us put together a panel and really talk about what landlords need to adopt for this new workforce. And they put together a really great panel. We have two panelists who just live and breathe commercial real estate innovation. And they've both successfully adopted the new digital office experience. So before we get started, I'd like to just highlight a couple of our upcoming webinars. If you're interested in these, or head over to cretech.com/events. You can register for any of these free upcoming virtual events. So last little bit of housekeeping is this is a highly interactive webinar. So we encourage questions early and often via the Q&A feature. So let me pass it over to Mark Rosenthal, our moderator, Chief Revenue Officer at HqO. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Bethany, and thanks for helping us put this together. I'm gonna have to send you a new headshot because my wife tells me that doesn't look like me anymore. I'll let everybody else be the judge of that. So I'm in the office today, which is great, and I've been coming in for the last several weeks. And one of the biggest drawbacks of going to the office is actually getting here, right? Traffic, for anybody who drives like I do, is usually terrible. And for me, the last couple of months, the commute has been amazing, right? But as people come back to the office, which they eventually will in whatever time frame that takes, all those cars are going to come back on the road, and what happens then? And I was talking to a friend recently who just bought a Tesla, and he loves the autopilot feature of the car, and he says it works really well, especially on the highway. And it works so well, in fact, that he can actually do work while he drives. Or while the car drives him to work. So I've been on video conferences with him. I probably shouldn't say this on a recorded webinar, but I've been on video conferences with him while he's in the car. I know he checks his email while he's commuting. And as we talked, it reminded me of a video that I saw during my time working at Google that was shared by the team that's now called Waymo, the self-driving cars team at Google, that showed a bunch of autonomous vehicles or self-driving cars at a traffic light. And the point of the video is how many more cars you can get through the traffic light if they're autonomous versus if they're driven by people. And essentially the principle is that if you have equal distance between the cars and synchronized acceleration through the light, you could get more cars through. And the same principle applies to all driving. Maintaining constant speed and distance from the car in front of you, reducing braking, can improve commute times by as much as 35%, according to a study out of the University of Cambridge. So what does that have to do with this discussion today, and why am I talking about it? Well, the auto industry is using technology and data to create and improve intelligence and efficiency and safety in their ecosystem. And what that really means is they're improving the physical experience of driving or commuting through digital tools. And so today we're going to talk about similar approaches for commercial real estate. As Bethany said, no updates on the election, so sit back and relax and dial in and enjoy. I'm Mark Rosenthal, the Chief Revenue Officer at HqO. We're a tenant experience company, and we're really helping to elevate the physical experience through, or the physical office space through digital experience. And I'm really excited to have Natalie and Jacinda with me today to share some thoughts with all of you on how digital tools are helping to improve the physical experience in the office. So for those in the audience not familiar with each of your companies, I can't imagine they wouldn't be, but Jacinda, maybe we'll kick it to you first. Tell everybody who you are, where you work, and what you do.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Jacinda Laughlin. I work at Nuveen Asset Management. Nuveen manages about $1 trillion in assets, and 125 billion of that is in real estate. So that's the group that I work for in a very nebulous strategy and innovation role. I tell people I'm just trying to get the real estate and technology industries to play nice. And Nuveen is a subsidiary of TIAA, which is Teachers Insurance and Annuity Association. Happy to be here.
And thanks for being here. Natalie, tell us about you and HPP.
Hudson Pacific is a West Coast real estate investment trust. We have commercial office and studio properties from LA, where I'm sitting at our headquarters, up through Silicon Valley, San Francisco, Seattle, and Vancouver. We serve mostly large creative media and tech companies, think Google, Amazon, Netflix. And we've got about 20 million feet, including land, about 15 million active in-service property. And my role is I lead sustainability and innovation. So what that means is I have two hats. One is I lead all of our work around environmental, social, and governance issues across our portfolio. And then the other is that I lead everything related to prop tech, essentially how are we integrating technology into our buildings.
Awesome, thanks for being here. So to get started, the focus of the conversation today won't just be on the now and how you're dealing with the impact of the pandemic, but we gotta start there, right? So cases are rising across the country. Employers are giving guidance to their employees about staying home, or whether that's short term, long term. What's been your approach to tenant experience or tenant engagement while people aren't physically in the building? Natalie, you want to go first?
Sure. I should probably preface this that because of my role, I have ended up leading our COVID response, which is not something that I thought, frankly, I would be doing. Did not see a pandemic coming along with everybody else. But for most of this year, I've been very focused on how do we make sure we're doing everything we can to make our buildings safe. And we've taken this 4 C's approach, where we're really focused on kind of things like consistency and coordination and convenience and communication is really important to us. That's our 4th C. And there we want to make sure that our thinking was we can put in all of the air filters and upgrade all of our cleaning. We can move all of the furniture around and put up signage everywhere, but none of it matters if tenants aren't aware that we're doing it, because everyone's at home. And so for people to start coming back and using our buildings and feeling safe, they need to know what we're doing. And so communication was paramount to us, especially in this virtual environment. And the traditional means of communicating with tenants, meaning sending emailing a tenant memo to our primary points of contact and then hoping that they forward it on. We just felt that that was not sufficient. And we've been already working with Mark and his team at HqO we had been piloting the HqO app as our mobile tenant app, and we had a plan to roll it out over our entire portfolio over 18 months. And then COVID happened and everything flipped on its head. And so instead we completely reinvented that timeline, and we accelerated the rollout. We rolled it out everywhere in less than 30 days, which we're really happy about, and it's ended up being a really important way for us to deliver on that communication imperative when everyone was at home.
Yeah, communication is certainly a big need that we continue to hear about across the base of customers that we're working with. Jacinda, how about you? What's your point of view? What's your approach to tenant experience while people aren't physically in the buildings at Nuveen?
Yeah, well, tenant engagement apps have been a huge part of that. And there's things that are kind of opt-in digital amenities. So whether that's fitness classes or participating in donation drives, wellness classes, new skills and tricks, a good distraction like a mixology class. Those are fun things that are available through the app and that people can kind of opt into. And then similarly, depending on an individual or a company, whether they're still in the office or coming back into the office, they can opt into the communications that are relevant for whatever they need in that moment. So just to kind of reiterate what you both have said, which is communication is so important. In the surveys that we've sent out to our tenants via the apps, a clear message has been people just want to know what steps are being taken on campus to facilitate a healthy work environment. And so making sure that all of those things that we are doing, we're communicating, like Natalie said, is definitely top of mind. So certainly want to reiterate that as a key objective.
In the surveys, I'm going to go off book here a little bit, but in the surveys that you're sending out, and I know you're both trying to collect a lot of information from your tenants. What are some of the pieces of feedback that you're getting from your tenants, either individuals, employees within the tenant companies, if you're getting that level of data, or from the tenant companies themselves more broadly?
Specific to COVID, you mean?
Yeah, specific to COVID, specific to return to work, and things that are important to them as they think about how to bring people back to the office, if that's something they want to do.
I can speak to the COVID questions. We've been doing a lot of work to try to really understand what's top of mind to tenants, and it's evolved. I mean, I think, as this won't be a surprise to anyone on the line, months ago, the focus was really around cleaning and touching surfaces, and like, okay, how am I going to have to touch the elevator buttons? And that doesn't come up at all anymore. Now all the questions around indoor air quality and our HVAC systems and how we're upgrading those. And of course, here with a West Coast portfolio, kind of that topic has been paramount, not just because of COVID, but because of the wildfires in the last few months. So at the moment, air quality is something we're spending a lot of time on.
Yeah, and for us, I think an understanding, because there are different, one of the first things that we did and that we're consistently doing is surveying to try to understand if tenants are not currently working out of the building, when they're planning on coming back. And that's a decision that's kind of made by the company, and then different individuals might have different needs and circumstances as well. But that's been the primary thing, is for us to understand when they're planning on having more employees come back into the building, so that we're ready, so that if they're not in the building, are there things that we can be doing that are smart around energy conservation and those sorts of things. And then when they are coming back, just making sure that they're fully aware of what steps we are taking, what the cleaning protocols are, what elevator protocol is, if that's a thing, and also, just making sure that we're providing the information that they need to come in and feel comfortable coming back into the building.
What are you hearing in terms of timelines? Because we just did some research, which I'll share in a second, but I'm curious what you're hearing. And are you hearing it it sounds like you're hearing most of your feedback from the tenant reps, as not from the broader employee population, or do I have that wrong?
Well, so when we send out the surveys, and one of the things that I love about this is that the app is for all building users. And while it's great for us to be coordinating with the tenant reps, sometimes there are decisions where a company might be like, okay, we're ready to open back up, but individuals are not ready to come back into the office. They're not feeling comfortable. So I think what's great is understanding, both having that conversation with the tenant rep and talking about how the company is thinking overall, but also hearing directly from the people that are going to be coming into the building. And so I'd say, it's gotten pushed back consistently for a number of companies. I think now it's looking, some folks came back this quarter. So there was definitely a good chunk and percentage then, but I think looking into next year, Q1, and then a lot kind of into the spring and summer months of next year as well.
I think that's true for us too. We're at about kind of 15 to 20% occupancy overall, but it really varies building by building. We have some multi-tenant buildings with a lot of kind of medium-sized firms that have largely come back. We have our studios are busier than ever, honestly. I mean, studio production, because it went on hiatus and the demand for content is so voracious, studios are under huge pressure to produce. So all of our stages are booked and busy and filming. And but then we also have buildings that are largely like single tenant buildings filled with an Amazon, and a lot of those big tech companies have said they're not planning to return really to the office until summer of next year.
Yeah, that lines up pretty consistently with the data that we found in our recent study. So we got our data back, I think, 2 weeks ago, and it was, as you said, Jacinda, across the end user employee base, right? And 28% of the people we surveyed are already back to work in some capacity. It doesn't mean 5 days a week, but they're already back to the office. 29% plan to return in Q1. So that's, sort of 57% of the workforce back by end of Q1. And then another 24% said after Q1, but in 2021. So almost, like almost 85 or 90% of the workforce coming back in, in some part of next year, and more than half being back in Q1 is a good signal to the market. We also asked them about their comfort levels when they return. So we've always talked a lot about the physical experiences sort of on site, right? The events and whatnot. And so we asked about comfort levels when returning to on-site events. 47% said comfortable attending outdoor events, no problem, which is not great if you're in Boston or New York in the winter in Q1, but great if you're in sort of SoCal or Florida. 31.5%, I was surprised by this, 31.5% said I'm totally comfortable no matter what. Doesn't indoor, outdoor, doesn't matter. And then a little north of 20% said, I'm just not comfortable at all. I wouldn't go to an event, indoor, outdoor, any crowd is not something I want to be a part of. So I thought that was just a really interesting look at sort of what the market is feeling right now about return to work and about tenant experience. So with that context, how do you think about digital extensions of the office experience and driving connection off campus? If people are going to be remote for another 3 months, 6 months, whatever, how do you drive that connection off campus?
I can start, which is that, while I said that we accelerated the rollout of the app because we felt there was just this real communication imperative, the huge benefit of it is that now we have it in place everywhere and we're able to use it to drive connection when everyone's off campus, which has been really valuable. And we've done a lot of different virtual events and services, and really trying to take this treat it as a laboratory period where we can experiment at relatively low cost and low risk environment. So we've done a lot of different things. I've been surprised at some things that people haven't been that interested in, like a lot of virtual fitness stuff. But the other things people have really loved that surprised me, like a pet costume, like take pictures of your pets and submit that. We did a doggy costume thing for Halloween at one of our properties, and we did a pumpkin carving costume, and a lot of our tenants got really into that. And it was very cool to see that connection continuing across our properties, even when everyone was at home.
Yeah, the competitions have been fun, especially with photos that people are sharing from home. What's your work from home situation? We've also had a lot of engagements on pet photos, which is great. But I mean, thinking about the digital extension of the office, I mean, I think the office that we're going to come back to is just going to be different. We're preparing to have the office that our tenants are already coming back to, have been in the whole time in some cases, as Natalie was mentioning, but we're trying to do a lot of work on the back end to make sure that, and you guys have heard me use this term before, but we really want to offer an omni-channel office experience. And so typically you hear the term omni-channel when it comes to retail. You might think of Amazon, being able to go order something on the Amazon app, have it delivered to your house, try it on. If it doesn't fit, I just take it to the Kohl's that's 5 minutes from my house. And so that online, offline experience. And so that's really been our focus during this time, is to be investing on what we need to do in the back end to understand all of the different building systems, to be able to integrate them. And it's a long journey. This sort of stuff doesn't happen overnight. Technology is magic when it's set up, but getting it set up definitely takes some time. But that's how we're looking at it. When I kind of break down the components of omnichannel office and thinking about the hardware, so not just our laptops, but also I think of the building as that hardware, the physical infrastructure, the backbone that we need. And then on the software side, I tend to kind of break that out into two different components. There's the building software, and what we're trying to do through tenant engagement apps like HqO is put all of the stuff in one place so that there's a consistent front end interface for our tenants, and they're not having to go to multiple applications or multiple links in a portal or this and that to get the different things that they need as it pertains to sort of facility needs. And then I also think that, the other part is the employer, the tenant software. And so that could be, kind of an example of how those things might be integrated over time, and are in some of our buildings is, having a amenity booking. So you reserve a conference room from your phone kind of on the way into the office, right? Or maybe, a week ahead of time. And then you get there, you've already had that meeting on your calendar, it syncs into your calendar. And then maybe even there's an email prompt that you get as soon as you set that up on your phone saying, hey, notice that you had Joey and Susie invited, they're not at your domain, so do you want to set them up with visitor access so that they're getting guest passes to come into the building? So that, full integration of the hardware, building software, employer software, again, definitely something that, takes time to build those things out on the back end, but that's been our big focus right now, is to think about what are the steps that we need to take? How do we want to prioritize different things? Because you can put a ton on the app, but what are going to be the things that are most value additive? And so, as an accelerant with COVID, a lot of that is around touchless or visitor management, right? Amenity booking as well. People wanting to know, like, if there is a gym, do you want to book it? How often is it going to be cleaned? How often have people been utilizing the conference rooms and all those sorts of things?
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think the ability to, for instance, reserve spots at a gym has been one of the most successful pieces of the app these days. It's particularly important. And then also we're spending just a lot of time, as our every other landlord is really trying to crack that access, visitor management, user experience nut. And how do we do that in as seamless a way as possible?
What do you think it takes to crack that nut, and what does the seamless experience look like?
I think Jacinda gave a really great description of the seamless experience, and one interface that is forward-looking and prompts people throughout that whole journey, and different people within the journey, the person booking the room and the guests, and they receive their QR code or whatever. But what it takes, I think we're still really struggling with what it takes, because A, there's a really complicated tech landscape, and B, the needs of every building are really unique. And so for us, it's a much more complicated question than kind of the tenant experience one, which has been, where it's been easier to say, this is our vision for tenant experience, and we want to roll this out everywhere. Access is a much more property specific conversation.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so if you think about the different access points, so it might start with parking, if there's parking in the building, trying to get into the parking, and then, into the building, maybe past the turnstile, elevator, separate access into the space itself. So those are multiple touch points that may or may not have the same hardware and or software associated with it. So if you're really trying to, which the end goal is definitely like absolutely touchless, from start to finish, it's a lot of integration. It's a lot of conversation around, does the existing hardware, is it Bluetooth enabled? Does it have the things that are needed in order to facilitate that? And, it's both the tenant app, but also those other companies and providers both working to integrate. So, kind of takes both sides and engineering time on both sides to be able to do that successfully. So I think, as a whole, the industry is, quite nascent in pushing those conversations. And, for us, I think that in rolling out tenant applications in a number of our buildings at this point, it's really prompted a good conversation around what are the systems that we're using? What is the software? What version of the software? It's all these things that you just didn't necessarily need to think about before. I kind of think about in the last 20 or so years, we've just been like, oh my God, technology, this is great. And everybody's just ran off in different directions with whatever solution fit their need that they heard about at the time that they needed it, right? And now it's okay, well, that's not actually super helpful unless we're able to integrate that and have these systems talking to each other.
Yeah, we talk a lot about interoperability, right? And sort of open systems and closed systems and how you put all those things together. And it's interesting because we work with developers who are building from ground up and thinking about all of the systems that they're going to put in from scratch, which is a whole different experience than working with more of like the retrofit where the systems are already in place and you have to figure out, to your point, just send to Natalie, what is the system? What version are we on? Is it mobile enabled? Is it Bluetooth enabled? Is it interoperable? Do they have APIs? Can we integrate with other partners, et cetera? And it's a big puzzle that sometimes gets really messy, right? So how do you prioritize? If we just took the access journey and all of those pieces that you just laid out, from parking to turnstiles to elevators to tenant suite to et cetera, how do you prioritize that?
Just to clarify, so prioritize those components of access, or?
Yeah. I mean, how do you prioritize the different pieces? Do you start with the user and what's going to remove the most friction? Do you start with the technology and what's interoperable and lowest hanging fruit? How do you, from an organizational standpoint, how do you think about it at Nuveen, and then Natalie, for you at HPP?
I think starting with the tenants and saying, is this something that you want? Because, you know, there is this general sentiment that like touchless is good, but if the entrance into a tenant space is their own system and that's not something that they want to prioritize and invest in at this time, and people are still going to have to be holding a key card, then that's obviously very helpful feedback to know initially. So maybe there's some other things and other features that we, you know, integrations that we prioritize in that building, depending on, you know, in general, what you know, tenant sentiment is there. So I think that that's the first step. And then really it's a lot of time and effort up front to understand all those different systems and asking all the right questions, because you don't want to start on one of those things again if another one's not going to work. And so it's a lot of time initially to be like, what is the roadmap for these things? How long will it take? So that we're setting proper expectations too with folks on how we could do that. So I guess that's kind of my answer, is like time up front to really think through all those things and have a clear game plan in place and be talking to those other providers to make sure that everybody's aligned there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think like any product, right, you've got to start with the user. You've got to think about the user experience and where the pain points are and what you're really solving for. Yeah. So
when you're looking at all the zooming out now, not focused on the access experience necessarily, but overall, you know, Natalie, you're responsible for all prop tech, right? So how do you evaluate technology specifically to make sure that it fits within the existing tech infrastructure and the tenant engagement goals or the broader goals for the asset or for the portfolio?
Well, broadly speaking, we have some, so not just for mobile access, but kind of all of our prop tech work. We have general criteria that we think of if we're considering a new technology area like mobile access, and then we're starting to look at the individual vendors within it. And first, there's a kind of strategic question on, do we prioritize this area? Like, is mobile access more important to us than any one of the number of other things we could be doing? And to answer that question, we go back to just core business case questions around, is it revenue generating or revenue accretive? Is there potential for cost savings? Does it significantly improve the user experience? Will it differentiate us? For us also, I mentioned I lead our ESG. Does it drive our ESG objectives? And so we're spending a lot of time on, for instance, on-site renewables, and that's that does have a lot of business benefits, but it also helps us achieve our sustainability goals. So we need a kind of thematic area to tick several of those items for it to rise to the top, because there's just too many things for us to explore, and we can't spend time on all of them.
Yeah, agreed. I think kind of high level data privacy. So obviously making sure that the groups that we're working with are GDPR compliant or the like in states like California or elsewhere, really just demonstrating best practices when it comes to data privacy, because that's obviously such an important part of the tech piece. But as far as prioritization, I mean, what we've done, and it's been a pretty bottoms up approach, is, we're not vertically integrated. We're working with a lot of different property managers at different assets. And so we've gone out and said, okay, what are the priorities? Like, what are you hearing from tenants? What do they want? And they've gone in, and we've got it all in one file now, which is amazing. It took us a few months to get there. And I have to say thank you to Sarah on the HqO team for putting that together. But so they've gone in and put in the different feature and integration requests and sort of data requests that they want, and marked it as high, medium, or low priority for that building. And then, aggregating that all into one file, we've been able to see, okay, we don't use the same work order system in all of our assets, but this is one that, like, multiple assets have been saying that it would be helpful to integrate. And so, looking at it holistically, that's going to be a high priority for us, because more of our assets and tenants are going to be able to benefit from that integration. So that's kind of the process that we've gone through recently, as far as, like, understanding what the needs are at the property level, and then trying to figure out how to plan at the portfolio level accordingly. I think another big thing is obviously engineering time. So are there teams there to build out those integrations? Again, don't happen overnight. A true integration is weeks or months. And so is there engineering capacity and dedication to execute on that?
Awesome, thanks. So I've only got a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up on the formal part. And if there are questions from the audience, we can take those as well. So if you have those, you can chat them into the Q&A button or the chat box, and we'll grab some of those in a couple of minutes. The category of tenant experience has evolved over time, right? From, I don't know, we're going to do an ice cream social, which seems to be the butt of every tenant experience joke. I don't know why the ice cream social gets such a bad rap. To things that are much more data driven, like, Natalie, I know for you all, when we launched, we gave away a Peloton, right? Which was pretty awesome. And we've learned a ton from doing all these launches about things that work and things that don't, and whatnot. But how are you all thinking about the evolution of tenant experience, not related to COVID necessarily, but just writ large in the market? Evolution of tenant experience, use of data to drive it. How do you think about that as the world does start to get back to some kind of normal?
Well, at least in the commercial office space where we are, I mean, our industry is seeing a transformation like no other. I mean, it's just crazy what's happening right now. And we will be feeling the impact of this kind of tsunami event for commercial office for years to come. And I think what most of the analysts are saying, and I totally agree with, is that there will be a real differentiation going forward, and really around quality, because certainly with the move to more flexible working and the growth of secondary and tertiary markets, we are in markets like LA and San Francisco and Palo Alto, places that are very crowded. Traditionally, there's been a lot of demand, like just a ton of demand, but we expect that equation will adjust. We don't think that demand's going to go away. There certainly will be, but we think that there will be a divide, and there will be winners and losers, and that will be really determined by quality. And so we see ourselves as a luxury product, Class A product across the board, and so it's really important to us to continue winning on quality, and tenant experience is a really key part of that. I mean, it's not the only piece of quality, but it's a really key part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd add that I think that, there is this shift from B to B to B to C. So instead of just signing, a 10-year lease or having that relationship with, whoever's signing that lease for 10 years, it's really about making the office a place that people want to come into every day, now that there is, an alternative that I think has been proven for not all jobs, but certainly a large percentage of them. So I think, consumerization, commercial real estate, it made its way slowly to us, but it's here. And so being accountable to those end users, I think a lot about, I think traditionally property management has been focused on what I call like the budgets and backbone part of the business, but there's this whole people facing side on a day-to-day, fostering that sense of community. And oftentimes the skill sets of people that might be good at backbones and budget aren't necessarily the right skill sets to lend themselves to, constantly coming up with fun new event ideas, whether they're digital or in person, and reaching out to different community organizations nearby, retailers nearby, and really plugging into the neighborhood. So I think that that's for us been part of the evolution, and acknowledging that, there's a dedicated and specific need on that people and community side. I think to your point about data, Mark, is a big step forward for us has just been asking tenants what they want instead of us guessing, right? Sitting around a table being like, you've got someone who likes golf, they're like, they want Top Golf. And then I'm like, no, a salad bar. Like what, like everybody is just like projecting what they would want, but like we don't matter, it's what our tenants want. And so being able to just simply ask them in short form surveys, hey, we've got this retail space that's coming available. What would you like to see here? What would be a great amenity? Or, we want to put some capital into this space, but like, again, what would you like to see before we're investing in, trying to build it out as a restaurant? Maybe there's a need more for, quick kind of like pharmacy goods and stuff along those lines. So I think that's a big step that's happened is in the evolution, is just being able to, through solutions like HqO, ask tenants what they're looking for. And, when you know what they want, it's a lot easier to deliver on that.
Yeah, I think the rising voice of the employee is a really important point that you both made. I've told this story before, but when I was at Google, our office was in Cambridge here outside of Boston, and I knew I know one of the developers who's doing a lot of the development in the Boston Seaport area, which has become this amazing new spot. It used to be all parking lots, and now it's like this destination in the city. And we had the chance to do like a build to suit building in the Seaport, and I brought in the developer to meet with our real estate and workplace services team. He gave this really compelling presentation about what the building could look like, about commute times, which is where I started the conversation, right? Commute times from north, south, and west into the Boston Seaport, and no matter which direction you came from, it would save the average employee 10 minutes each way, right? Super compelling. And the real estate and workplace services team said, wow, this is pretty cool. We should explore this. And the first thing they did to explore it was send out a survey to the Google Cambridge employees and ask them what they liked about Cambridge, what they thought about the Seaport, if they'd want to move, and a bunch of other questions. And there was no second meeting, because the employees basically said, we like Cambridge. We had a lot of employees who lived in Cambridge or lived in the next town or two over, and just were resistant to the move. Not to mention the fact that we're on the corner of the MIT campus. So from a recruiting standpoint, the people ops team was resistant. And that was the end of the conversation, despite a really compelling case that was made to the real estate and workplace services team, right? So that empowerment of the employee, the voice of the people, so to speak, is I think a really important newish trend that's worth paying attention to. We talked a little bit about data. We talked, Natalie, about differentiation. Coming into this year, the data that we saw was that 92% of commercial real estate execs plan to maintain or increase their spend on tenant experience. So if that's the case, and that's a big differentiator, how do you deploy your capital, and how do you differentiate your experiences? What's your strategy, if you want to share your strategy?
Well, I mean, it's a mix of, I think it's important to take a broad view on tenant experience, and a huge part of it is that actual tenant engagement that happens through the app. But you can't forget, a lot of it's just pure capital work, right? I mean, adding a gym, renovating the lobby, upgrading the elevators, putting in new HVAC and higher grade filters to make the building safe. I mean, there's a a huge capital component to it that for us goes through we're doing it now, our annual kind of 10-year capital planning process, and tenant experience I think is always top of mind in that process, and it's just changing. What we think tenants want is changing, and then where we can be, but that's a longer term conversation. You can't do those projects overnight typically. And so where you can be a little bit more nimble is on the OpEx side, right? And using something like an app to test new things. And we mentioned it before, but I've really enjoyed this period as a time to experiment because we can do all these things virtually that are so easy to say like, oh, that didn't work, let's try something else. Oh, that did work, let's do it again, but tweak it. And I hope we're able to maintain that ethos going forward, because we were certainly learning a lot in real time. And even as we move to more in-person events, there's no reason why we can't continue that experimentation focus.
Yeah, I love what you said there, Natalie, about like using the app and this time to test new things. I think that's so common in the technology world, right? It's like, let's pilot something, let's try it. We know it's going to fail sometimes. That's okay. Whereas with commercial real estate, people are used to talking in billions and millions of dollars. And so they're like, what? No, it's like, no, we're not playing with that kind of money, but we can test something, at a much more affordable cost and leverage lessons learned at one property, across different ones along those lines. So I think that's a really good point. And I think that, it's fun. It's what keeps it fresh, right? Is like doing new things all the time. And, just to kind of reiterate my previous point is like, just, asking tenants in one building, don't always want the same thing as tenants in another building. We've seen that in kind of what we've looked at and what we've asked folks about. So I think that's important to acknowledge too. And then Mark, before you brought up kind of causation versus correlation. So sometimes there will be, we'll think that something is part of the, part of a shift or change in sentiment, and it might just be correlated. So was it, was increased tenant satisfaction generated from, putting in a gym and a big capital expenditure, or, something a little bit smaller, just as far as like a quick amenity that they needed, right? And so, trying to dig in before those big capital expenditures, I think is big. And then, I mean, no surprise to anyone here, I'm sure, but flexibility is just something that people have been wanting more and more of for a long time. And I think this has just accelerated that trend. And so, in addition to kind of tech enablement and this omni-channel office, that's a really key area of focus for us is when you're talking about capital expenditures, it's investing in flex space at our different assets so that our tenants can kind of, upsize and downsize a little bit more, or even just people have the opportunity to come in for, a few hours a day if that's what suits their schedule and that works with their employer.
Awesome. All right. So speed round, one or two word answers on these next three questions for each of you, if you can. I can't. I talk too much. All right. For people who are trying to figure out how to get started, one piece of advice. Where do you start, Natalie?
Understand what you have already. To just at this point about an inventory. Yeah.
Jacinda?
Experiment, to Natalie's point. Loved it.
Love it. Okay. So good dovetail into my next question. One thing to test.
On tenant experience?
No, doesn't have to be. In general.
Ground floor retail. That's just changing so much. I think there's real, tremendous opportunity in that to redefine that. Yeah.
You went in a different direction than my brain was going. Now I'm trying to reroute. Satisfaction, adoption. That's where my mind was going. Sorry, I'm not good at the one answer thing. That's
good. This is the part of the call where we demonstrate true authenticity by me totally putting you on the spot and going off script, right? Okay, one thing to look for when you're evaluating technology.
Jacinda, you go first this time.
Fair. Open protocol.
What was it?
Open protocol.
Urban protocol. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Customer service.
Cool. All right. So to close, one of the questions that we get a lot is about ROI, right? And I think it's a really interesting and challenging question. Jacinda, you talked about correlation versus causation, right? So I think about ROI. I heard a great story from one of our customers about communication, which is one of the 4 C's, Natalie, that you articulated at the top of the call, right? Big southeastern U.S. portfolio. They've rolled out the HqO platform, and one of the things he said was that we've been able to streamline communication where previously we would, we as the landlord would send the note to the property manager to the tenant rep to the end user about a fire drill or about an ingress or egress protocol change or whatever else. And he said, now we can go directly to the end user. We cut out those 2 channels of communication, the property manager and the tenant rep, and have that direct line to the end user. It's more reliable. It saves us time, and protects us. So that's not necessarily a monetary ROI, unless you back into the efficiency and the time savings of having to play the game of telephone, right? But an ROI, a quick ROI story from each of you.
Well, on that point, I do think the communication is with the broader audience is so key. And it's not just on the COVID protocols, but on, to your point, on changes. So when the George Floyd protests were happening this summer and even this week with the election, our teams used the app heavily to issue memos. We had a lot of properties that were right at the epicenter where a lot of protests were happening, and sending out memos. Okay, this side is boarded up. We're closing that gate. We're opening this pedestrian gate. Extra security over here. And that was changing in real time in a way that just sending out tenant memos, it would never work. Okay.
That's a really good example. I think, frankly, a lot of the ROI for us is still somewhat indirect. And I think that's okay. Really what it comes down to, in my mind, is attraction and retention. So for us, attracting and retaining tenants, and to do that, helping them attract and retain their talent, right? So that's ultimately what we're striving for in getting to ROI. We have seen really positive engagement from potential tenants, looking at the apps and seeing that as a really strong amenity or a digital version of the existing amenities. And then another thing I'd add is cross collaboration for us. So I mentioned that file where we had all these different properties and they were tackling different things, and then kind of consolidating that and connecting people within our organization or at our property management companies that are doing the same things and sharing lessons learned and things that are working and things that aren't working. And so I think that there's a lot of operational efficiency there too, but again, that one's a little bit more indirect. So it's an increasingly competitive environment with office, and there is that flight to quality. So I think that even though it's indirect right now, it's going to be very material.
Awesome, thank you both. So a couple of questions in the chat here. Two from Stephen Blum that are related both to neighborhoods. So. Our question is, are any of you seeing landlords with multiple buildings clustered together, sharing amenities across buildings, not referring necessarily to a campus of connected buildings, but rather several buildings within a mile of each other? So it sounds like maybe either within your portfolios, buildings that are separated, or even across different ownership groups. Have either of you seen any of that?
Yes, all of our whole strategy is around really very laser focus on neighborhoods. So we have a lot of examples of that in our portfolio. And when we were initially partnering with HqO, we chose one of them, a cluster of properties we have that are all within a mile of each other in North San Jose. as a place where we wanted to start with the app for that exact reason, because some of them have gyms, some of them do not. Some of them have conference rooms, some do not. There's a shuttle that connects them all. There's bikes that connect them all. But our property teams knew that that not all tenants were aware of all of the benefits that were available to them, because it wasn't a completely connected campus. It was, to your point, a little bit more dispersed.
Yeah, likewise for us, definitely in a sort of campus environment, but also in urban environments where we might not own those buildings next door. We really are trying to make amenities in our space available, where appropriate and depending on demand. So if our conference rooms are booked all the time, just based off of tenant use, then we're going to continue to make that space available to them. But if that's not the case, who else can be utilizing that space? And then on the flip side, a big key piece to me in our strategy is the local retailers. So in reaching out to local retailers nearby, asking if they'd want to be included into the app so that people from their office across the street can go order online and then pick it up really quickly. So I think that sort of engagement with the small businesses nearby is really important. Not only a great amenity to the building users to kind of have that connectedness, but also hopefully a great source of additional clientele and revenue for those businesses.
Yeah, especially
so critical right now. Yeah,
so critical. Okay, question from Michael Parks. Are your tenant employers working with you to integrate their internal systems like room bookings via Outlook with your shared amenity booking software? I don't know if that's for me or for all of us, but do you have, maybe I'll ask it a different way. Do you have tenant companies in your buildings who are asking to integrate their own suite level systems with the base building app?
I'll take this one first. So at this point, we don't have too much outreach from tenants in that capacity. We do so for existing buildings. For ground up development, we do have developments where there's probably kind of two main, you've got Microsoft and Google, right? And so at one of our buildings, the tenants were Microsoft users. And so as a part of the ground up development there, we had a chance basically to do ground up development of the technology too. And so that was integrated. It's a lot, trickier to try to do it, thereafter. So no outreach from tenants specifically, but we're starting to have these sorts of conversations. And I think that, with those two platforms that I mentioned before, it will, become a little bit more commonplace as like an opt-in or out for employers, right? Like, do you want that integration set up to, the building system available?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question, and I'll echo, this is not something we've really made much headway on yet, but I see it coming.
Yeah, and I'll just say from the HqO perspective, this is 100% something that we're engaged with and working on. So we want to be able to help landlords. We get a lot of questions from landlords, from owners about getting deeper into the tenant suite to better understand how the suites are utilized, not just the base building functions, and to be able to provide that as a service to their tenant companies as they think about a full end-to-end solution, right? So we've developed things like roles and permissions and our audiences feature that will enable us to take all the base building functionality and extend it into the tenant suite. In the same way that we were talking earlier about access control, right? In the same way we do with access control, where I carry a credential on my phone for our base building system here, which is HID. I also carry a credential on my phone in the same app for our tenant suite door, which is a proxy access control system. So same logic applies from a technology standpoint. Okay, question from Nick Wang, what technology/solution are you considering to improve the tenant experience of a partially remote workforce?
Just kind of going back to my omni-channel office pitch there. So to us, the tenant engagement app is again, kind of that centralized dashboard that you plug in all of these other things into on the back end over time. And so that's probably the number one answer. Companies like HqO, making sure that you can start to have those conversations, like Mark was saying, with their team about, what are their clients that are, tenants asking for, and start to like figure out a real strategy there. So I think that, that piece is critical, because you don't want to have to be going to a lot of different places, right? And so that really is, to some extent, a force function of the conversation, and to the previous question, a force function of conversations with tenants about those sorts of things. And so just to, probably be more of a verbose than necessary, the simple answer, I think, is like, this has definitely been the first step for us.
Yeah, and I actually think this question is very tied to the previous one, because it really is about how far into the tenant suite do you go? Because once people are home, office, their connection to base building offerings is less important. And so you've got to be connected back into the tenant offering. Yeah.
Awesome. So we're just about out of time. There's one more question that I just want to that I'll tackle, which is I know HqO recently came out with building operations software. Are you all still using the tenant app and experience side of HqO, and also the building ops side as part of your goals for seamless integrations and interfaces? If so, how is that improving your operational experience holistically? So I think I just want to clarify what HqOS is, which is the operating system for tenant experience in commercial office buildings, right? So there are 3 parts to HqOS aimed at solving 3 problems, all of which we've sort of touched on today. The first one is, how do we help attract and retain talent for tenants, and help attract and retain tenant companies for landlords, right? Most employers spend 90% of their OpEx on their people. So if they spend 90% of their people and 9% on their rent, as a landlord, how can you help with the 90% problem of attraction and retention? And that's where the mobile application or the tenant application comes into play. That universal remote for the building, that frictionless experience, that services layer that has all of the great experiences that we're all collectively trying to create for Nuveen and for Hudson Pacific Properties and others, right? Second is, how do you navigate through all of the 8,000 prop tech companies that are out there and make sense of who's well-funded and who's GDPR compliant and who is going to handle my data the right way, and whose technology is, homegrown versus built on some open source system? What's the scalability of the software? Who's open source and interoperable and who's not? And that's where our marketplace really helps to solve the problem by creating essentially like an app store for shopping and buying different technologies and understanding the landscape. And then last is differentiation, and this is really the big one, right? 92% of commercial real estate execs maintain or increase spend on tenant experience. How do you differentiate your asset? And Jacinda and Natalie, I think you did a great job of talking about how you two do that at your respective companies. That's where we can really use data from our digital grid to help drive some of those decisions. So I hope that was a clarifying answer to the question. And with that, we're out of time. And I want to thank you, Jacinda, and you, Natalie, for your partnership overall and for joining me here today to talk to the market. I think it was super helpful. I hope it was super helpful for people to hear. You two were great as always. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks.
Thank you, CRETEC.
Thanks, guys. Yeah,
Yes.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, HqO team. If we didn't get to your questions, we'll reach out to you after the fact. But that's all for us today. Next week, we've got a great webinar on a SPAC. And if you don't know what a SPAC is, I highly recommend you joining us. So until then, guys, thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bethany.
Bye.
Thank you, CRETEC.
Bye-bye.
Bye.